Hello and welcome to the channel. Today what we're going to talk about is Logic Apps and Power Automate. What are the differences? Part 1. Alright, so why this episode? So recently I presented at the Prairie Dev Conference in Regina and also another internal information session with another group outside of Power Automate and Azure Logic Apps. And so continue to get a lot of questions about what is the difference between Power Automate and Logic Apps. And since these services change so much, like even if you look over the last year how much they've changed, I figured it was worth putting together a multi-part series about what are the differences between these different services. And just to make sure like it's clear, like this is not a versus conversation. This is really about education and just explaining what are the differences, and companies should really consider their requirements when choosing which to use in each individual service. But something I did want to highlight is that more and more so from an industry perspective, we're seeing vendors talking about integration and automation in the same sentence. So if we look at, say, UiPath, which has historically been an automation focused company, now talking more about integration through the use of APIs. And if we think about MuleSoft, who is historically more of an integration service or provider, talking more and more about automation through some of their acquisitions around RPA, we're starting to see this convergence or intersection, if you will, of these two sort of paradigms and bringing them together. And so I think that was another driver for me putting together a series. I'm calling it Intersection, as a way to start talking more and more about these two different constructs, but from a Microsoft perspective. So let's go ahead and let's jump into the content. All right, so before I get too deep into this subject, just wanted to sort of call something out. So this presentation is very much not a versus conversation. There's no trophy being presented at the end of this series in terms of which tool is better, because that's not the point. Organizations can leverage both of these tools, and certainly I've done so outside of Microsoft. Prior to working for Microsoft, I have this blog post where I talk about these two different technologies. And in that blog post, I talk about the real winner is an organization that can figure out how to derive value from each of these tools. Because I firmly believe that there's a place for both of these tools inside of an organization. And really the purpose of this content is really around education and to give organizations a sense of the capabilities that are offered. And naturally, whenever you're evaluating technology, requirements should be driving those decisions and that outcome. And really that's what we're focused on here, is just around education, ensuring people understand the different options that are available, and then being able to take a set of requirements and map them against these capabilities and then come out with the right outcome for you. And I think that's what's pretty important. I've had the benefit, the opportunity to work in both product groups, both at the time Microsoft Flow, now Power Automate. I'm currently on the Azure Logic Apps team. I also spent a couple of years as a customer PM inside of the Power Platform organization. So there's certainly an opportunity for organizations to lend this. I'm a firm believer in both sets of technologies, a big fan of both technologies, and I think it really just comes down to applying how and when you would use them, and that's really the purpose of this presentation. All right, so for part 1, and this will be a multi-part series, at the end I'll show you some of the other topics I'm debating or considering discussing. If there's something you'd like to see more of or even go deeper, let me know in the comments. There's a good chance that I have some sort of existing video as well, so do check out the playlists. I've got Power Automate, I've got Logic Apps playlist. High probability, I've discussed something that you're interested in on the channel previously. But for today's video, I want to focus on 4 specific areas. And I'm going to do this at a fairly high level. I think these topics I could talk for days pretty much about, but I want to at least have a starting point, and then let's create a dialogue and understand where I should double down and share more info. So we're going to start with service subscription. Really what this comes down to is multi-tenant versus single tenant. We're going to talk a little bit about security boundaries, where data lives, how do you control that data or execution. I'll talk a little bit about additional security features and governance. And governance for sure is a topic that I've had, I think, a 3-part series on my channel when it comes to Power Platform. And so this is much longer than what I'm going to get into, but I will include some links in the description for you to go deeper on. All right, so let's start off with service subscription. And remember, once again, when I talk about these things, it doesn't mean it's bad. It's more of this is the way it's been structured. So, maybe some of these things matter to you, maybe some of them don't, and that's okay. But really want to create some concise info around some of this stuff. So if we think about Power Automate, like this is a SaaS-based offering. And by virtue, that means it's a multi-tenant service. So obviously Microsoft will put in the right controls, the right security boundaries to protect your data from other companies' data, but it is a multi-tenant experience. And what this means is that, these resources will live inside of a Microsoft managed subscription. Obviously the Power Platform is built predominantly based upon Azure technology. And if you go into your Azure portal, you're not going to see your flows there, your cloud flows, your desktop flows, right? And that's because this is a managed service. This is Microsoft taking care of the hosting and the security around the specific services and apps and chatbots and cloud flows and desktop flows that you actually go ahead and build and use. Now, obviously, there's Azure AD integration, right? That's basically the key pillar in terms of identity management and how security works, role-based access control works, licensing. It's all sort of integrated into Azure AD, which is a positive, and there's some additional capabilities by doing that, and we'll talk a little bit about that on the security slide. Now, one of the benefits I would say of this being a SaaS service is that Microsoft can provide a dedicated Power Automate experience for you. And so I have an image here of the Power Automate Maker portal. And as you can see, it's very streamlined to the needs of Power Automate users. You've got everything that you need, templates, learning, connectors, your access to your flows, solutions, etc., all in one place, and it's really tailored for those user experiences. Now, if we flip over to Logic Apps, we're going to see a PaaS-based offering, so Platform as a Service-based offering, which means that this is accessible through your Azure portal, where you can go ahead and find all of these resources. Now, when it comes to Logic Apps, we have 2 flavors. Technically, there's 3, but we're going to focus on 2 here. They're the most relevant. Consumption, which is a multi-tenant service. This is kind of the initial launch of Logic Apps was in this mode. We continue to support consumption. It's not going away. It's a great on-ramp for you to be able to go ahead and start using Logic Apps. Now, this is a consumption-based model, and so as a result, that's where the multi-tenancy comes into place, as it becomes advantageous for customers to be able to use this in a very cost-effective manner because you're able to share resources with other customers. Once again, we will isolate customer data to protect it so that it is completely managed. Now, you may know this, you may not know this, but when we think about cloud flows in Power Automate, you can see that I've got it listed as multi-tenant. Well, there's a good reason why it's listed as multi-tenant there, and then we've got consumption on the Logic App side also being multi-tenant. And that's because they share the same engine. It's the same underlying platform in terms of how you go ahead and execute your cloud flows or your Logic App workflows. And it's for these reasons you've got the same expressions library. You've got similar designers. Now, there are some changes or subtleties that are different based upon user personas, but these are very similar in terms of what they do, how they do it, and the overall capabilities itself. Now, the other flavor I want to talk about is standard. And this is the newest offering for Logic Apps. And this is known as our single tenant offering. And what that means is that you have dedicated storage, dedicated compute. Previously, when I talked about multi-tenant, those are, generally shared, constructs, especially the compute side of things. You might have some dedicated storage if you're using integration account, but in general, you are taking advantage of cloud economics to deliver that service. Now, with standard, what we're saying is for customers that want more isolation, dedicated storage, dedicated compute, There's advantages of doing this. We'll talk a little bit more about this in the security section, but you've got more control over these resources. Now, the model in terms of how you license this or use it is a little bit different, but as a result, you can generally take advantage of more enterprise features, and we're going to see more of that throughout this presentation. Lastly, Azure Portal is, generally the experience where all of this gets brought together. Yes, we do have a VS Code and Visual Studio experience for developers, but I'm talking more about from a subscription perspective. You go to the Azure Portal and you'll see the typical Azure hierarchy of tenant to subscription to resource group to resource, and that's how you go ahead and discover and manage these components. Obviously, there's CLIs and APIs and things of that nature, but we'll leave that out of scope for now. Now, if we think about security boundaries, and once again, we'll start with Power Automate, everything starts with your tenant. And this is where you have your Azure Active Directory that belongs to your tenant. And that becomes foundational in terms of everything that you do in the Power Platform. Then there's another level construct called an environment. And this is actually a pretty cool thing where we can, it provides many benefits, which we won't get into here, but you've got things like solutions, and you have the ability to package up different applications and chatbots and workflows and deploy them, collectively. But in this context of security boundaries, we've got out-of-the-box roles that have been predefined for us. We also have the ability to go ahead and create custom roles as well. And so naturally, by using these roles, whether they're out of the box or custom, you can limit what users can go ahead and do within a Power Platform environment. Now, we're going to talk a little bit more about on-premise gateways kind of in a future session, but I did want to call it out here. It does provide a security boundary, or in some ways creates a bridge across security boundaries. And really what that means is, because we're in a SaaS-based service, if we do want to access on-premise resources, for now, the way to do that is through a gateway itself. And so that in itself has some maybe nuances or characteristics about how you go ahead and secure and govern gateways, but it is an important concept to understand when you think about how you traverse security boundaries. And then lastly, we also have licenses. Now, some folks might argue licenses should never be used as a security boundary. And in general, I would totally agree with that. But I think the reality is, when it comes to the Power Platform, it does become one. If we think about RPA, if you're in an environment and you don't have access to an RPA license and you've got trials blocked, you're not going to be able to go ahead and use that feature. You could argue the same thing about, say, AI Builder as well. If you don't have access or credits, you're not going to be able to go ahead and use those features. So now, this isn't to say you use features as a security feature, but reality is it does become that in some ways. Now, if we flip over to Logic Apps, naturally, we still have a tenant. We still have Azure Active Directory. It is a primary pillar in terms of how the rest of this works. But inside of Azure, we do have tenant. We have multiple subscriptions. Those subscriptions have resource groups. Those resource groups have resources. And as a result, you have this very robust, strong identity and access model that allows for either single resource assignment of security roles or through essentially inheritance. So for example, maybe you've got a series of resources that belong to a resource group. If you've got, say, elevated privileges in that resource group, say owner or contributor, then by nature, you would have those same access to the individual resources through inheritance itself. And so that's pretty cool. It's pretty strong when you think about it. Now, it is something that you do need to think about as you go ahead and build out all of your services and really think about how to manage all of these resources. Now, when it comes to Azure resources, we've got roles that can be assigned to those resources. So out of the box, these are roles that are established by the Azure product groups that provide some capabilities. So for example, in Logic Apps, maybe you have a operator role that allows you to read and see the status of resources, but you can't go ahead and say modify them. And so you can go ahead and leverage out of the box roles, and naturally where warranted, you can go ahead and create custom roles as well. Including Gateway for similar reasons to Power Automate. When we think about multi-tenant service or the ability to use some of the Azure connectors that support gateways, on-premise data gateways. Once again, you can use that to go ahead and traverse security boundaries, or essentially prevent it too, right? If you impose blockages of gateways itself. And then lastly, and we'll talk much more about this on the next slide, but we've got VNet support with Logic App Standard, where you can now go ahead and create, say, a larger security boundary by being able to include other resources, whether those be Azure infrastructure or PaaS services, or even on-premises resources as well. We can go ahead and put them in a VNet, essentially creating a bubble, creating a security boundary, but having more control over what belongs into that bubble. So very popular feature that we do see in Logic App Standard. Some additional security features. Let's talk about Power Automate once again first. If we think about HTTP triggers, we've got a SAS token. So if you don't have that SAS token, you can't go ahead and access that resource. We've got some support for service principals, and I call this out limited, and it's not so much a Power Automate thing, it's more of an endpoint thing. So if an endpoint has exposed service principals, we can go ahead and use those. So for example, Dataverse supports service principals, so we can use it. Other services like, say, SharePoint doesn't. And so as a result, we can't use it. And once again, not the fault of Power Automate, but more of what does the underlying or the endpoint support. We have Azure AD. We've talked about this as a key pillar. There is a feature called conditional access that would prevent you from using your AD tokens, say, off of your network. So you can create conditional access policies that impose certain constraints about how you use that Azure AD token. And so if you wanted to limit where people can go ahead and log into Power Automate, you can certainly go ahead and do that from a conditional access perspective. You can also enable MFA as well, another form of conditional access where if people are creating connections, they get challenged, you have to then go ahead and respond to that challenge to create the connection. And obviously the connection itself, you just need to do that generally once or when you have a password change, and then you're set. Another feature which is pretty important if you think about Power Automate and Power Platform in general, where people might have accounts in multiple tenants and they want to use connectors, and theoretically you could either push or pull data from one tenant to another tenant. Now, naturally you would have to have access to resources in both of those tenants to do so. In some cases, this is a benefit. If you think about mergers and acquisition, you need to migrate data. This is actually a pretty cool feature. Generally, you may not want to enable this, but you can go ahead and turn that off. And that's the screen I've got below here. This is the tenant isolation preview feature found in the Power Platform admin console, but it's a pretty cool feature and pretty powerful. Now, if we flip over to Logic Apps, on the HTTP trigger side, we do support that same model of a SAS token, but there's some additional things that are also included. IP restrictions, and so this applies to both the consumption-based and the standard-based version of Logic Apps, where you can go ahead and add, say, permit lists or deny lists, and then basically authorize specific IPs or their related ranges in order to access the resource. There's another feature which is pretty cool. It's called Easy Auth, which allows you to basically look for an Azure AD token and then be able to authenticate and authorize based upon that token itself. And so this is also supported in consumption and standard. So if you expose an endpoint and you're like, no, I want to make sure that there's a token, an Azure AD token associated to this request, you can go ahead and enforce it. And so this is a very highly recommended feature to use. Next up, we have private endpoints. This would apply to Logic App Standard, where we can say, if you want to go ahead and access this endpoint, it needs to happen from a local network, from a local VNet itself. And so you could deploy this private endpoint inside of a VNet. Perhaps that VNet is peered with on-premise resources, and then you could say only retrieve or receive requests from that specific VNet itself. So another good way of trying to isolate traffic that's not using the IP restrictions way, but basically making that private, hence the name. Some other general security features that are supported, so that VNet integration, the ability to connect to a VNet. So perhaps you've got a SQL server and maybe that's running as IaaS inside of Azure, or maybe it's running as PaaS inside of Azure, and you've exposed SQL as a private endpoint, you can go ahead and use this VNet integration to connect to it. Similar to Power Automate, so let's jump to Service Principal. Similar to Power Automate, Service Principals are supported, once again, bound by what the endpoint provides. Now, the next one we'll talk about is Managed Identity, and this is pretty important. So if you think about Azure, Azure has all of these different resources, and using Managed Identity allows you to establish trust between these resources. So for example, if we want to go ahead and access, say, Key Vault. Now, part of the problem sometimes with Key Vault is like, I want to go ahead and access secrets, but I need to provide a secret to access secrets. So how do I securely store the original secret? And so Managed Identity helps you get around that by establishing trust between these resources inside of Azure. And so what you can do is create essentially a role, that allows you to say read data from a specific Key Vault, and then associate the logic app with that specific role, which will then give access to just that logic app to go ahead and access the key itself. So there's no need to go ahead and store additional secrets in order to do that. And then lastly, similar to Power Automate, Azure AD, conditional access. I won't go over that again, but similar behaviors as we discussed inside of Power Automate. All right, another super important topic is governance, and I'll include links in the description because this is a topic that warrants more than just sort of a few minutes of explanation here, but go ahead and check this out. So naturally, if you think about some of the core audiences for Power Automate, is that part of that is democratization, allowing more people to go ahead and build automation. Sometimes you'll hear the term citizen developer, or it could be just even IT folks as well. Whether it's IT developers, IT admins, also using the technology. But the idea here is you generally have a larger audience of people that are using the tool, and some of these folks may not be well versed in good cybersecurity hygiene and habits. And so as a result, administrators look for different tools that they can use to govern the usage of the technology, just to ensure that there's no misses from a corporate compliance perspective. And so the Power Platform, understandably, has invested quite a lot of resources in this area, and for good reason. And I think it's fairly robust these days in terms of what's offered. Over the past few years, there's been a lot of key investments that have been made. So to start off with, you do have a Power Platform Admin Center. I've got an image below that represents that. As part of this, you've got many different features within there. I've already talked a little bit about role-based access control. That's where you'd go ahead and set that up. But we've got another feature called data loss prevention, or DLP, which is fairly important. This is something every organization should look at. You can go ahead and choose, which connectors can be used with each other, whether that's in a business context or a non-business context. You also have the ability to go ahead and just flat out block connectors if you feel that's warranted. And so that's where you would go ahead and do so. Then we've got cross-tenant restrictions. I've talked a little bit about that already, so I'm not going to go further into that, but that's an important feature if you're concerned about users from multiple tenants being able to share or exchange data across those tenants. Then another really cool feature as well is that, obviously we've got an admin center. Behind this admin center is a series of APIs that are used in order to impose these different governance settings. And Power Platform's done something pretty cool where they go ahead and basically expose management connectors. So the Power Platform Admin connector, and there's a Power Apps Admin, and I think a Power Automate Admin connector still as well, that allows you to perform any of these actions, but to be able to automate it. So that allows you to create like a workflow and allow you to sort of customize these things and to enforce and enable governance at scale. If PowerShell is more your tool, then similar capabilities are available through PowerShell. Call that same APIs. The difference is it's a PowerShell experience versus a management connector experience as well. And so once again, that's pretty cool. Licensing considerations. I know once again I talked about this where licensing shouldn't be a security feature, but why this is important is when we think about Power Platform environments, there's something called the default environment. And when you have seeded licenses, so meaning like say M365, Office 365 licenses, there is some entitlement available to customers. And as a result, you can have users going ahead and using Office connectors and being able to automate across, those different scenarios. And so that's something where you should always be, conscious of like this admin center, because even if you're in a seated scenario, you're going to want to look at these settings and make sure you're properly governed. Naturally, if you're in a paid scenario, you then have the ability to create additional environments. Those environments are going to include Dataverse generally. You also then have some of the other paid offerings around like AI Builder that you may want to impose who uses them and how as well. And then lastly, my old team, the PowerCat team, the customer advisory team, has come out with the Power Platform Center of Excellence kit. There's kind of two flavors of this. There's the general Power Platform one, and then more recently, there's an automation kit as well. But these are essentially the best practices. They work with a lot of enterprise customers. They build tooling and guidance, and then they make it available to customers. So you can go ahead and download this kit. You can make changes as necessary, and it really uses Power Platform technology to go ahead and govern the Power Platform. So there's a lot of sort of things you can learn by even just looking at that kit and how they go ahead and address it. So all in all, very important topic. Power Platform continues to do well in this area. There's something which I don't have here, which I just thought about, is a managed environment. So if you're looking for some of these capabilities and want more of an out-of-box experience, you can go ahead and take a look at the managed environment as well. Now, if we go over to Logic Apps, you're going to see this bullet list is smaller, and it's probably smaller, I guess, because it doesn't need to be bigger, maybe. And what I mean by that is, in general, if you think about Azure, it's an opt-in experience. Like, you're going to have to be opted into Azure and having the right level of access and identity management in order to go ahead and do something. So if you don't have the ability to create something through, say, a contributor rights, like, you're not going to be able to create something. So it's just a little bit of a different model than Power Platform. Like I said, Power Platform generally is a larger audience. You could have like thousands or even everyone in your organization having some level of access to Power Platform, depending upon how the organization is set up. Azure, it's generally not the case. Generally, it's, you've got some sort of commit to consume, basically entitlement, where you kind of commit to spending X dollars with Microsoft per year. And then as you start to give people access to Azure and underlying capabilities through roles, they can naturally go ahead and create new resources, assuming they have that access. So in different, like, it's just kind of generally just different because of the granularity in terms of access itself. Now, on top of it, there is Azure Policy, which is worth mentioning. Azure Policy allows companies to go ahead and enforce governance, at an Azure level. And so, for example, we've talked a little bit about DLP, data loss prevention, in the Power Platform world. We can use something kind of similar if we wanted to restrict which connectors can be used on the Azure side. Now, this generally isn't as big of a deal because you tend to have fewer people using, say, connectors in Logic Apps. As a result, the skill set of these folks might be more technical, and so as a result, there could be less need. And I say could. This is all very subject to different organizations itself. But this is kind of the starting point. Hopefully that helps explain governance concepts. All right, so that's part one of this multi-part series. Here are some of the topics that I'm considering: deployments, user dev experiences, on-prem connectivity, data transformation, so data mapping, sharing, approvals, robotic process automation, first-party integrations, approvals, limits, licensing. I'm not going to get super detailed. That's a rabbit hole, but I think I can explain at least the models that are used. I think we'll add licensing to that. But if there's something missing here, go ahead, add it in the comments, and I'll see what I can do about including it. All right, so thanks for checking out this video. Look for some upcoming videos as well on the topic, and we'll catch you again soon. Take care.